Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Ryan Lee. I hope you're staying safe amidst the pandemic, and I hope you're having a happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe with you and your family. We've got our recap from last week as well as our previews into next week. We've got some discussions to talk about regarding a lot of top 25 matchups. Let's get right into it. And let's just start with this. I want to lead with something from what was almost without a doubt, zero questions about it, the game of the week. It was number 3 Ohio State versus number 9 Indiana. Ohio State jumped up to 4-0, and Indiana slid to 4-1. It was a great matchup, 42-35. Number 1, I'm going to say right out of the gate, I picked Indiana plus 20.5 because 20.5 as a line was absolutely ridiculous, considering the way how Indiana's offense and defense have been performing. But at the same time, you got to think about this one thing that you hear a lot about, especially if you've ever played organized sports coming out. And especially if you've ever played organized sports like football or soccer or basketball, anything like that where you're on an open field. They always refer to this thing called hustle. And you never think about that word. What does that word actually mean? You know, hustle, you think about like hustlers, you think about like what that exactly means and what exactly that stands for, because it means a lot of things. The thing that somebody put it this way, somebody who's aggressive, a go-getter. When they say it in terms of sports, however, they mean somebody who basically can give it 100% of everything they've got, can find that 6th, 7th, 8th gear even when they're absolutely gassed. And there's a lot of great examples of what hustle means in sports, or exactly what it is in sports. One amazing example happened a couple of weeks ago on Sunday Night Football. There were memes about it all across the sports community. It was DK Metcalf chasing down Budda Baker, even though Metcalf was behind about, 10 yards from where Budda Baker intercepted the pass in the Seattle-Arizona Sunday Night Football game, and he literally fights and he literally hunts this guy down. He literally hustles all the way from end to end just to stop him short. And if I'm not mistaken, the Cardinals only got a field goal off of the ensuing drive because Metcalf refused to give up. Even when it seemed like a sure pick 6 on Russell Wilson, what Metcalf did was he literally fought his way back, even though he was probably gassed, or it seemed like there wasn't a shot because Baker was so far ahead that Metcalf literally found that next gear and hunted him down. That's a great example of what hustle means in sports. A lot of what you might hear about from coaches, especially in the high school phase, and even the college phase too. When I say hustle, it pretty much just means go harder. Even when you seemingly can't go any harder, you can still give it that all. You can still give it that 100% because it is more than possible. And we saw a lot of that in this Ohio State-Indiana game. We saw in almost all the games that I selected as my top games of the week this week. We saw it in Northwestern Wisconsin. We even saw it in the Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma game. We saw a lot of that. Whether if it was guys not giving up on plays, whether if it was guys doing the extra bit, punching out the balls to force fumbles, whatever it may be, there was sure a lot of guys who took their initiative and basically took the extra bit of effort to create something spectacular for their respective teams. It doesn't happen very often in sports. It doesn't happen very often, period. Because the thing about that is that people tend to get what is referred to as complacent. They kind of get a little lazy. They're content where they are. They do the bare minimum. But then you get guys like, one example, I just had DK Metcalf literally chasing a guy from the opposite end of the field just to chase him down, prevent a pick six. And that could have changed the whole game, really, because of the fact that the ensuing drive, they only got a field goal, not a touchdown. If Baker scores that game, it swings the entire game. And Arizona most likely walks away with that game. But no, because of one guy's determination, because of one person's grit, one person's drive, it can not only spark something, but it can also fuel essentially an entire team's morale. It can essentially increase what's referred to as their mojo, I guess. That it factor, that something to just find a second gear. It's that mental reset. Because a lot of times when things are in tough situations, a lot of people just easily give up. They easily do. But in this game specifically, you've got two of the best teams in the entire country literally going at it. If I had to say it myself, this game so far up to this point has been the game of the year. Maybe the only other option is Clemson versus Notre Dame, and that's about all I can think about. Because aside from Clemson and Notre Dame, I can't think of another game the entire year with such highly ranked opponents that has actually been this good. Like, yeah, we had Clemson, Miami, that was 1-7. That was the number 1 seed versus number 7 seed in the country, but it was kind of a blowout. We had Alabama and Georgia, who were number 2 and number 3 at the time they faced off. However, the difference there is that the second half started, the game wasn't that fun anymore. This game literally came down to the wire. And the thing is that it started off with one guy's ability to give it his all, that hustle, and a bunch of other guys around him who were able to put very similar effort into that as well. It started off with Justin Fields, the Ohio State quarterback. You know, at the end of the day, he got 18 for 30, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Sure. But let's talk about the context of his first interception. It was a big man interception, which is always fun to see. It was literally on the first play. On the second interception of the game for Fields, it gets picked up by Jerome Johnson, a 304-pound, 6'3" defensive lineman for Indiana. However, the context there is very important because what happens is that it's a bit of a desperation play, I'll say. He was getting wrapped up and taken to the ground, and then the Ohio State receiver almost catches it, but it's kind of bobbled up into the air, and then another Indiana player tips it, gets bobbled in the air, can't exactly hold on it, and then there's this defensive lineman, Jerome Johnson, number 98, 304 pounds. He's literally trying to do everything he can to catch up and make up those couple of yards so that he can dive and make an interception on arguably the first or second best Heisman candidate of the bunch right now. That's crazy to think about. You think about how literally guys, they keep churning their feet and try to push themselves in the end zone. That happened on a touchdown for Indiana, where literally they were right at the goal line. They had the reception, I believe it was by Ty Freifogel, the leading receiver for Indiana. Literally, he gets stood up by a defender right at the goal line, and he just keeps pushing his feet to fight into the end zone. Everything about that said he should have been stopped, but no, he kept churning his feet and pushing forward. Another great definition of what it means to hustle. Because in those situations, you can't give that stuff up. You can't, especially in a shootout like this game was. Especially late in the game where Michael Penix throws that very costly pick six over to Ohio State to make the game 42-21. But once again, that's why they keep going. They keep pushing. And that's why Michael Penix had probably the best game of his career. 491 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a pick. Which ended up being a pick six. A lot of those yards went to Ty Freifogel for 218 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's not to say that anyone else on the team should be disregarded for Indiana. I mean, 5 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. What an amazing game by the Hoosiers. Even got a half dozen passes deflected as well. 3 picks on Justin Fields. Most of them zone reads, plus that one hustle by Jerome Johnson. Almost everything about Indiana showed no quit. It showed that there was something worth playing for, and there most certainly was. And although it was a very disappointing loss by Indiana, the coaching staff on the media after the game say, hey, I'm proud of our guys. They did everything they could. And most certainly they did. But that's not to say that Ohio State didn't have anything of their own. I mean, Justin Fields literally got manhandled into a rushing touchdown. Master Teague had to essentially carry that entire team to a total of 307 yards on the ground. And a lot of the 300 yards had to be carried on the load on the back of Garrett Wilson. 169 and 2 touchdowns. Most of Ohio State had issues with the secondary. Yes, they had 8 passes deflected, but a lot of the issue came in the fact that they only got 2 sacks on Michael Penix and only 4 tackles for loss. Whatever it was about the Ohio State defensive line was just not having it. It just wasn't having it. And Indiana gave themselves every chance to at least try to win this game. The turnover battle was close, 4-3. The third down conversion percentage was just a little bit under 1/3. And especially when you're down on the clock battle, about 23-30 to 36-30, you kind of need to have that aggressiveness, that pace, that hustle, that extra aggression, that extra bit of effort. Props to Indiana. I will give Indiana major props. They might have slid down in the rankings, but at the same time, they showed with this game that they can keep up with anybody. And if it's these 2 teams in the Big Ten Championship, we've got another great game ahead of us. Because a lot of what these big matchups entail for us is that they are previews to something greater. Or in some cases, it's the one and the only. We're probably not going to get a game like the Red River Showdown this year, where Oklahoma and Texas had one of the best shootouts of the entire year, especially with the way the standings are now in the Big 12. But who knows? It could be a situation like, for example, just think of examples off the top of my head, Monday Night Football about a couple years ago. It was a young Jared Goff versus a young Patrick Mahomes, 2 of the best young quarterbacks in the game, literally the highest scoring Monday Night Football game in Monday Night Football history. It was 54-51. In those cases, we didn't get another iteration of that. In some cases, like Indiana and Ohio State, or maybe the same thing with Clemson, Notre Dame, with the way the conferences are lined up, we could most certainly see that matchup again. Especially for a much greater prize. Not just a slot in the win column, but it's for the Big Ten trophy. And Indiana showed that they can most certainly keep up. And Ohio State, in most cases, is largely considered the cream of the crop when it comes to college football and the NCAA and what it stands for. Not just in terms of program history, not just in terms of what they've done, but what they're doing now. And one team who most certainly was not the cream of the crop, especially what I thought they were, was Wisconsin. once again, Wisconsin, I'm very disappointed in you. I really am. I had high hopes. Especially when statistically almost across the board, they dominated Northwestern. 21 first downs to 16 in favor of the Badgers. Third down conversion percentage, 3 for 16. Okay, not the greatest, That only comes out to about 18%. But at the same time, the Wildcats were not better. They were at 2 for 15. That's 13%. 366 yards to 263. Advantage goes to Wisconsin. Another thing that I think is crazy is that it's 37 minutes, 37:01 to 23 minutes, 22:59 if we want to get nitpicky. There was domination almost across the board on the Wisconsin side of the ball. However, Northwestern wanted to prove that they could stay in this game. They wanted to prove they had what it took. So what did it take for Northwestern, to be exact, to improve to 5-0? Well, it took a punch-out. It took a mistake by Wisconsin on a handoff. It took a lot of interceptions that maybe should not have happened in the first place. But whatever you want to say for it, Northwestern made it work. 2 fumbles, 3 interceptions by the Wildcats versus Northwestern, who just had the 1 fumble lost. Peyton Ramsey, he transferred over from Indiana, and he's been pretty good for Northwestern. He's held them up to a top 20 standard, 203 yards and a pair of touchdowns, which is not bad. And then you also have Graham Mertz, 230 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. Not the greatest, I'll say, but not bad either. However, one of the biggest things I think really deterred here is the fact that both of these teams are most clearly defensive squads. It explains the low score, only 17-7. And I believe I said that Wisconsin's offense had a chance to do something because the matchup suited it. But at the same time, I think it's really tough for Wisconsin to do something like this because they were held at such a high regard, and Northwestern just kept pushing and pushing the boundaries of what Wisconsin could actually do. Here's their game breakdowns ever since the start of the regular season. A 45-7 win versus Illinois. Nebraska canceled. Purdue canceled. 49-11 versus Michigan, and then they lose 17-7. They were averaging 47 points a game on offense. They were averaging 9 points a game on defense. Which, to be fair, 17. Good job on the Badgers' defense. He did their jobs. But also 7 points on offense when they were supposed to be putting up 40 plus. Yeah, crazy. But at the same time, Northwestern, not a shabby defense themselves. They held Maryland to 3, they held Iowa to 20, held Nebraska to 13, held Purdue to 20, and held Wisconsin to 7. And yes, you can most certainly make the argument that Northwestern has not had the greatest of opponents. However, you cannot discredit what they've done so far, especially when it comes to absolutely killing on defense. They have absolutely been killing on defense, and they deserve all the praise they can. However, I think the issue was here is that Northwestern did not make the most out of their possessions given. Because let me put it this way. After Wisconsin fumbles, Northwestern has a drive of 2 plays, and then they fumble themselves. Wisconsin fumbles, followed by a missed field goal. Wisconsin throws an interception, leads to a punt. But they get another interception, that one goes to a touchdown, so that's something. However, one of the biggest issues then is you go later down the game, and then you get a turnover on downs by Wisconsin, because they're a little bit desperate, and they don't get a field goal out of it. And then they throw another interception, and then Northwestern has a turnover on downs. And I know Wisconsin has another turnover on downs, but at this point, Wisconsin's just milking clock, so they're okay with punting. Northwestern had so many chances to put this game away. And I mean really put the game away. However, they just didn't utilize the chances they got, and I can see why. Because number one, they got dominated in time of possession. And number two, it's because their rushing game was kind of abysmal. 13 yards on 8 carries for their top rusher, Drake Anderson. Peyton Ramsey had 7 attempts at 6 yards. Their entire offense as a whole, nobody ran for more than 15 yards. 13 was their highest on the team. What is that? I think if Northwestern wants a shot at all later in the year, they got to fix that rushing attack because they need to do something about it. Am I happy that I lost because Wisconsin couldn't cover 7.5? I'm not crazy about it, but hey, I'm 2-1, so I'm not so down about it either. Because one game that I also really liked, because it was splashy, was Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma. It was very splashy. And when I say splashy, I don't mean like the water sense. I mean, it was very eccentric, I guess is the best word I can use. It was very out there. It was just a lot of stuff going on and a lot of stuff that just says, whoa. There's a lot of stuff there that kind of impresses you, that you kind of like to see. And one thing that most certainly made a huge splash was Oklahoma's offense. And to be fair, I never had down Oklahoma's offense. To be fair, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, kind of the way I expected it to go. Especially knowing the way that Oklahoma State's offense performed. However, my big concern wasn't Oklahoma State's offense. My concern was one of two things. It was a little bit of Oklahoma's defense and a little concern about Oklahoma State's offense. Because the highest point total that Oklahoma State, the Cowboys, have done so far in their 7 games played is 47. And that was winning against Kansas, who I believe have not won a game yet, if I'm not mistaken. 0-6 in the conference, 0-7 overall. So yeah, they put on a spectacular game versus the worst team in the conference. When that happens, let's say somebody has the best statistical game ever for a program, but it's against like some D2 program, or I guess if I'm going to put it in the sense of the NFL, like it's against the Jets. So what? That's literally my thought on it. So what? Cool. You put up a bunch of points. You put up 47 in the game. Amazing. Does not matter at all. That's just my opinion on it. If you blow out the worst team in the league, who cares? I get the concept, but in reality, it doesn't mean anything. You could put a JV team out there, and it could probably put a similar effort. Of course it's not, but like you get the idea. And I was actually relatively concerned about the Oklahoma offense because, yes, they let up 9 to Kansas, but against every other opponent, they've let up some crazy point totals. They let up 37 to Iowa State. They've let up 38 to Kansas State. They've let up 45 to Texas, 28 to Texas Tech. I was concerned about Oklahoma's offense, sure. But at the same time, I think Oklahoma's defense kind of shut me up a little bit. And crazy as it sounds, I kind of liked it. I remember that I said after the second loss to Iowa State, when Oklahoma was 1-2, that I doubted Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley. I did. I whiffed on that take. I didn't know if they could keep going or not. But at the same time, I believe I also said to hold the brakes a little bit. Because they've got a weaker stretch of the schedule coming up until they have difficult opponents again. Because they faced 2 very difficult opponents at the time, Kansas State and Iowa State. They were both good programs so far this year. But we have to see how Oklahoma's going to do, because the Big Ten is just slowly unraveling, because they're one of the conferences later on their season. 7 games out of most on average 9 to 10. It's pretty good. Right now, they're about a full game behind Iowa State. Or I guess with tiebreakers, a game and a half behind Iowa State. They got about a game and a half to a full game lead against Texas, because of head-to-heads. And Oklahoma State, who's right there as well. So the Sooners have that going for them. They can still compete for the Big Ten championship. However, right now, the first place team, they've already lost to. They've lost to Iowa State before. But the good thing for the Sooners, it was only lost by 1 score, which means they can hold on. Especially when they have this freshman, this redshirt freshman, in at quarterback, who's been outstanding so far, Spencer Rattler. 301 yards, 4 touchdowns. Even came in with another touchdown with his feet. He was good. Very good. And he's shown that he can take over upon this, what is seemingly becoming a quarterback factory for Lincoln Riley. Hurts, Kyler, Baker. And yeah, it hasn't been a very long list so far. But at the same time, Lincoln Riley has not been at the job for very long. And he's already created a QB factory, which sparks amazing things. The thing about Rattler is that he's actually a pretty good quarterback if you break it down. I think with more time with Lincoln Riley, he's going to really build into something. And something that really got built into its own, which I also had doubts with at the beginning of the season, is Oklahoma's defense. They held Oklahoma State pretty good. 4 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, 4 passes deflected. A grand total of 246 yards, including 148 between their 2 quarterbacks, Spencer Sanders as well as Shane Illingworth. 168 yards amongst the 2 of them. 1-1 for the 2 guys combined. They didn't hold any rushers more than 50 yards. Aside from Tylan Wallace, no other receiver over 50 yards. And yeah, Oklahoma State really could not do anything. That's why they got outpossessed 35 minutes to 25. That's why they were held to 78 rushing yards a team. Sure, 3 for 13 on third down is pretty good, 21%. Oklahoma just happened to be at 1/3, 4 for 12. Oklahoma's offense has been something I've been really impressed by, especially in the latter weeks. I believe I also said it when I was making my picks for the game. Because I believe I said I'm going to take Oklahoma -7. And I think I also attributed one of the reasons to Oklahoma has got a lot of special on the offensive side of the ball. And Oklahoma State's defense is very good, but nothing special. Oklahoma State's offense, most certainly nothing special. And considering the way that Oklahoma's defense is played, I didn't really see anything special either. But at the same time, let's say the offense and the defense, they kind of cancel each other out, you know. They're just very okay. It's a pretty good defense versus a okay offense. Sure. It's another thing when you pair up a really good defense with a special offense. It's so much different. And yeah, I was 2-1 on the weeks in my picks. I picked Oklahoma -7, which came in fruition. I did not get, however, Wisconsin -7.5. In Indiana plus 20.5. Yeah, that was an easy pick. 2-1 on the week. Pretty good. That's been it for a recap of Week 11, at least the top matchups of the week. And we'll be going through all that, and that's going to be coming up right after this.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back here on the GSMC College Football Podcast by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, Ryan Lee here. I once again hope you've had an amazing holiday, and we are going to be going through a little bit of some unusual news. Now, usually in these types of episodes, whether if it's the Wednesday segment or the Saturday segment, what I typically do is I go through not only the game recaps, but the game previews as well. But with the Thanksgiving holiday and stuff like that, I figured, give it a break. At least for this week. I just recapped the games from a couple weeks ago. My picks, I went 2-1. But at the same time, I think with the Thanksgiving holiday having just passed, or I guess in this case, with the upcoming other holidays coming up, whichever holiday you celebrate during the December season, there are a lot of things that you can consider quote-unquote holiday miracles or Christmas miracles or whatever you want to call them, depending on whatever holiday you celebrate, whatever it may be. But at the same time, a lot of things happen because of the way that the opportunity has been given. And of course, whenever those opportunities get given, people will most certainly take advantage of that the best they can. Now, one of those examples is not exactly on the better side of things in the college football spectrum. However, simply put, due to reasons that we're still not exactly 100% sure of, one of the craziest bits of history have actually been made over the week, which is that Vanderbilt, currently sitting at 0-8, including their latest loss to Missouri, actually made a huge bit of headway over the weekend because of the fact that they've had some issues with their kicking. And they figured one of the ways to do that is to think about what other sport revolves, that sort of leg power and leg accuracy. They went the soccer route. And typically when stuff like this happens, you might more than frequently than not look towards the men's soccer program. Or maybe towards someone who on the team used to play soccer. I don't know, something like that. or you just find anyone on the team who just has a good enough leg, can kick it straight, and can kick it far. However, the thing about the Commodores is that they made some big-time headway over the last week due to the fact that they actually called up a player, not from the men's soccer team, but actually from the women's Vanderbilt soccer team. Now, I'm sure by now everyone has heard the Sarah Fuller story in some way, shape, and form. It's been pretty much all around the news because of the fact that it didn't just make any sort of history. It broke what is considered to be the quote-unquote the norm. You know, most people stereotypically consider the norm to be male athlete football kickers or just male athlete football players. You know, you don't really stereotypically see females in that side of things. However, you have to really consider the circumstances here with the fact that a lot of barriers have really been pushed over the last several years. And one thing that I'm more than understanding of is that it challenges the norm. It is something that you more than likely would not have seen in any other regular basis. But at the same time, I think stuff like this actually proves the tale, but also shows the potential and definitely the abilities of what can potentially be to come. Because I'm not exactly sure what it is. If it's just the way things are, if it's because of societal norms, or maybe it's that very slight bit of biology or just perception, whatever it may be. Because a lot of the barriers, a lot of those types of things, the challenge of the norms, is really something that has been pushed a lot. Everyone has seen, or at least has heard of, the story of Jackie Robinson when he was with the Brooklyn Dodgers back in the late 40s. He was called up to the major leagues right before the start of the season. They really needed a baseman. The Brooklyn Dodgers did, so they called up Jackie Robinson into the big leagues. He was introduced into this very questionable crowd, I'll say to the least, but at the same time, he was the first man of color in Major League Baseball, which was huge at the time. He definitely had to endure a lot to get to where he was, because not only did this cause a rift amongst the fan community or amongst the country at the time, but even inside of their own locker room. The same thing even happened to Willie O'Ree, who is often seen as Jackie Robinson, but in the NHL, in the National Hockey League. He was the first one to break that barrier in hockey, pretty much. Willie O'Ree was put up to the Boston Bruins. He eventually would get struck in the eye with a puck. And what happened was that he didn't let it be known. And he also got met with tons of criticism, not only from the fans, but it would even cause rifts within the locker room because they weren't sure about how that would affect the norms of the game. Now, the super cool thing that has actually happened with this story, the Sarah Fuller one, it shows the fact that, yeah, the first kickoff wasn't the prettiest, but a lot of special teams people, specifically NFL special teams people, kind of talked about how the placement of the ball is weird and the holder wasn't really doing any favors, and it's a little bit different when you're translating from a soccer goalie to football. It's a very different ball. It's a very different hit point, stuff like that, kind of attributing it to all the stuff. However, I think those types of barriers have been, I'd say, I guess for lack of a better term, a little more widespread than it might have normally been in the circumstances of the 40s and the 50s. We have obviously grown, not only as a species, but as a society, as a people, since that point. Because it's been since the 40s and the 50s, and we're in the year 2020. We're 80 some odd years removed from that. And that's not to say that Sarah Fuller was universally praised. She most certainly got a lot of haters. And I mean a lot of haters. To be fair, she was a goalkeeper on the Vanderbilt women's soccer team who won it all in the SEC. And she's taking over the kicking spot for a Vanderbilt team who might be very far from the football title of the SEC as well. And it's kind of ironic that their coach got fired right after the game too, being 8-0. There were a lot of people essentially yelling about this game, claiming that it was a publicity stunt, claiming that was a way for the NCAA or Vanderbilt or the SEC to gain revenue, to gain money, or maybe to send more boosters into the soccer club, whatever it is. The only information that I can go off of, which is the same information that's basically public to everyone, is the fact that something big has happened over the weekend. And part of the reason I think it is so important to talk about is not just because of the way that this norm is being challenged in specifically the NCAA, but across all sports in general. Because let me put it this way. Who has won the World Cup in the last 2 World Cups? I most certainly do not see it being the men. The Women's World Cup actually houses the last 2 winners. And if I'm not mistaken, the men didn't even qualify in 18. So it's showing this improvement, this higher standing of what these so-called barriers can do in other sports as well. One of the craziest examples I can think of, which is actually a legitimate example in sports, is in swimming, because of the fact that they have what is referred to as the mixed medley relay. I think it's one of the biggest, I think it's one of the craziest and most bonkers relay concepts ever created. What they would do is they take 2 men and 2 women in a 4-person relay. Because it's a medley relay, every single person has to swim a different stroke. Backstroke, breaststroke, butterfly, freestyle. But they have to choose strategically which women they want to put on each stroke, on each leg of that relay, and which man they want to put on each stroke or each leg of the relay. They have to be very specific about how they choose. Because the thing is that you can have a man leading off as the number 1 seed versus a woman, and then in the second leg, it's a woman versus a man, and the man can easily catch up. therefore making the final two legs a complete crapshoot. And let's say you build such a ginormous lead and the anchor leg is a woman. She's got to do everything she can to hold off, especially if there's a guy in the name next to her. It is one of the biggest crapshoots, but also one of the most exciting events in all of swimming. Because you do not know what's going to happen in that mixed medley relay. Even though the hate and the criticism has been there, one of the things that I've heard a lot, especially with all the stuff going on now, is that with every opportunity comes a chance to grow. Because sometimes opportunities like that come once in a lifetime. Did I just quote Eminem there? Yes, I just did. But also, did it make my point? Yes, it did. How many people around the country, around the world, especially collegiate athletes, relative to the population? Easily not a lot. And then you have to cancel all the Division 2 and 3 schools, and then you're left with all the Division 1 schools. Okay, no problem. But let's take out all the specific D1 schools and just do specifically in the Power 5. And you have a lot less schools. And then the SEC only, you get even less schools. And then specifically in Vanderbilt, the odds are even less there. So whatever has been done, whatever has been taught, whatever has been seen, a lot of times they might not think about it. Understand the other shoes. Really see what the person's head at. And understand why this is so important, why this matters, why this is a thought. What we do a lot of the times is we tend to fixate a lot more on the nose. We tend to fixate a little more on what can go wrong. Or we get nitpicky on the stuff that maybe wasn't the smoothest. Like the fact that the cookoff wasn't the cleanest, bounced around a bunch, and got fielded starting past the 30. And the fact that Vanderbilt's team on offense was not the greatest, especially in the air. Definitely a lot more effective on the ground, even though they had all this stuff going on. And it's a large chunk of the reason why they're 0-8. But I don't blame them for doing what they did. They gave someone a chance who more than likely fairly deserved it. For whatever those reasons may be, I do not know. Because all it simply comes down to is hard work and effort. You're not going to hire someone for your company if you find out that there's going to be on Twitter on their phone or whatever social media on their phone all day. You want to bring someone who's the hardest worker. You don't want to have a server who's going to run the business, but at the same time have that server run all wrong orders. Like, it just seems absurd when you put it that way. It sounds absolutely insane when you see it that way. However, we understand that it's a very fragile, a very volatile situation going on. We get that. But with stuff like this comes one of the most important, most inspirational, influential moments in essentially all of sports history. And part of me is just glad I got to be able to witness it in the first place. That has been it for our show for today. Yes, we were going to go into picks, but we'll get into those on the Saturday show. We're back to the normal recording schedule, and we hope you had a happy Thanksgiving and a fantastic week off. I want to say thank you so much for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast. Make sure to leave a like, a rate, and to subscribe to the show. Feel free to leave a comment as well. Every single opinion matters. Once again, we are out here. My name is Ryan Lee. This has been the GSMC Podcast Network and the GSMC College Football Podcast. Have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmc.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.